Welcome to the Wordy Pier podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pier podcast.
So, hello and welcome everybody. This is the Wordy Pier podcast, and we are
tired?
Sure, but also we're going to be diving into a possibly controversial topic. I don't know. We'll see.
I don't know if it's... I don't think controversy is the right word. I think it's... I think it's more like how to enjoy things that you want to enjoy.
Yeah.
And then I don't know. I get... Well, go ahead and introduce the topic, and then I'll give my thoughts on it.
Well, so the basic idea for the topic is separating artists or authors from their works, and whether you should do this, whether there's a line to be drawn, things like that.
Yeah, and
kind of we're going to be talking about a few different authors and, what their personal views on certain topics were, whether that affects our perception of their works, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, so you are going to know more about this than me for, your authors, because I've always been of the mindset that I don't really think too much about who makes the stuff that I consume. So, I don't really go to shows and get autographs or anything. I'm not one of those people that's like, ooh, I'm going to go meet this person and so forth. I've met a handful of famous people in my life. None of it is the highlight of my life, and none of it is something that I would have really gone out of my way to do.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
So I don't really think too much. Like, if I pick up a book and read it, a lot of times you can get a general idea of what someone might believe from reading their books.
Sure.
And other times there's... you might not know, but looking into it isn't exactly something I care too much about. I don't really read biographies either. Some people are very interested in the stars of the shows and the writers. I just don't care that much, so it becomes difficult for me to really know anything about an author other than based on what I know about what they've read or written.
Okay, fair enough. On the other hand, there are authors where I don't know. I'm generally of the opinion that you probably shouldn't let someone's opinions outside their writing affect your desire to read what they've written. But sometimes things can get pretty. There's a definite contingent of people that say, "Oh, you shouldn't read so and so because he said X outside of his writings."
It depends on the extent of things in a lot of cases. Like,
well,
for
sure.
instance, let's take a for instance. Disney makes a lot of movies these days that are absolutely atrocious.
Sure.
I neither like the movies, nor do I like the messaging, nor do I like the company. Ergo, there's 3 pretty decent reasons to not give them money. Now, the biggest one, of course, is that they make crap.
Right.
I would say if they were making phenomenal movies, and I couldn't stand,
missing out on
if I... Yeah, if I didn't like them as a company, but they were making great movies, I would probably still go see the movies. If I didn't like what they were doing with the money that they earned to make the movies, like if I thought they were putting way more of that money into things that I disagreed with than into new movies that are also awesome, I would consider not giving them money anymore.
Okay.
So I mean, there's a lot of leeway there, in as far as I'm concerned, but like I, for the purposes of what we're doing today, I gave a quick look over at some of the things that Terry Brooks has said or done, and I'm sure that him and I would agree on many things in terms of the political world, but nothing that I see there, and the fact that he probably hails from a complete opposite side of a fence from me is anything that would make me not want to read his books further.
Sure.
And there's the majority probably of the media that I have consumed in my life has been from someone who I disagreed with pretty strongly on 1, 2, maybe 20 things.
Possibly
and,
more.
Just to give an example, like, I am not too big into the whole drug culture and pot culture that everyone seems to think is just the greatest thing ever these days. I feel like we've fallen back into the 1960s or something, but either way, that may not be my thing, but I still love listening to Willie Nelson music, so I'm not going to stop listening to his music just because he liked to toke on the pot a bit here and there.
He indulged in the doobies.
Yes, he I think the running joke is that even Snoop Dogg had to walk away from a party with Willie Nelson.
Very nice. Very nice.
But yeah, it's that kind of thing. It's
I think we're going to mostly be on the same side of this issue in general. It's just that, like, it seems like there's a group of people on the other side of this issue that maybe we need to. I don't know if any of them are going to listen to this, but like maybe we need to try to make the case that you should listen to people that you disagree with. I'm not sure exactly how we want this thing to go.
On the one hand, I would say you kind of want to know what the people who disagree with you are actually saying.
Sure.
Because I've run into a lot of people that disagree with me, and they say things, and it's like, but that's not actually what I believe at all. You just don't know what you like. Think about the people that will say, well, who would build the roads without government?
Right.
They didn't stop and think of it past that. That's as far as they got.
Right.
It's like, well, the same people that build them now, just they would be being paid by someone else instead of the government. But you've got a lot of people that are like, okay, so they read something, they love it. I think Harry Potter is a good example in this case.
Okay.
There's a lot of Harry Potter fans who, after becoming fans, did not like J.K. Rowling as a person, and decided that a lot of Twitter posts and things came out of this, and a lot of Tumblr blogs, people saying things like, oh, well, I really love Harry Potter, it's a pity it was written by such a horrible person.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them continue to, give money to Harry Potter things, and others stopped, which, both are valid, whatever you want to do. But on the one hand, it's like, okay, how much evil in the world is J.K. Rowling really committing that you really care that much if you're sending a couple extra bucks her way?
Yeah.
I mean, if I thought that... So if I was a Harry Potter fan, which I'm not, but if I was, and J.K. Rowling was, Hitlering people, genociding half the globe, I would probably stop buying Harry Potter stuff.
Okay.
But that's not happening. So,
right.
Yeah, I would definitely stop giving money to a genocidal J.K. Rowling. And if Terry Pratchett, my favorite author, had been down in Zimbabwe beheading people, I probably would have stopped buying his books. And, like, at least 80% odds in those cases. I mean, they were really good books. But
yeah.
But that's the thing. It's like, how many of these people that just say something that you disagree with are really doing anything that is, other than, oh, they said something that hurt someone's feelings, is really hurting the world. On the other hand, there are a lot of things, and this is the part where it becomes a bit of a struggle to figure out where you stand on the issue, because there are things that people do that are seriously disruptive to the world, and I'm going to go ahead and just kind of, sneeze out the word communism and say that, yeah, people who believe that and promote that and do those things, definitely hurting things in the long run, especially if they gain any political influence. I mean, that's basically the equivalent of decapitating people in Zimbabwe in my book, because it usually ends up with the same results.
Right.
The thing is, though, those people, because of their zealous belief in such things, tend to reflect that in their writing. And I haven't found too many cases where that makes for very good writing at all. So it never became an issue for me. So it's really hard for me to really point to anything personally where it's just like, yeah, I really disagree with that, but I kind of still want to indulge in the product, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, other than food, I guess you could do it with food. I mean, there's a lot of bad actors in the food industry, but you have to eat. It's not like you get a choice in that, particular
that's
area.
A little harder to refrain from.
Yeah.
Well, like, how far does it... Well, okay, so I have two thoughts. One, like, well, so what's your opinion of, say, George Orwell?
Well, okay, so we talked about this when you came up with this topic.
Yes.
And I don't really know much about him other than I don't have the story straight on this, so you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here. Like, Orwell writes 1984.
Yes.
And it's a book that really kind of reflects a lot of things that were happening at the time and did happen and are happening. A lot of people say, oh, it's not supposed to read as a manual, but he didn't write it necessarily because he thought that this is what the future holds so much as, no, these things actually happen. This is how people are, and this is what the future could be like because people are like this.
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone believes that Orwell wrote 1984 because he wanted things to turn out that way. I'd say that it's more accurate to say that he believed that there was no way to stop things from turning out that way. So Orwell was a committed socialist for his entire life. The only issue that he had with socialism was that its proponents were often often either very bad people, or that it wasn't, I guess, to simplify it down to one word, it wasn't kind or gentle enough. I read his book, The Road to Wigan Pier, which is not a piece of fiction. It's a piece of nonfiction about the coal miners in England in the 1930s. And, the thing about it is that I actually wrote a review of it that went up, that they published over at the Mises Institute. But one of the things that was interesting about that book is that there was no point in Orwell's thinking that suggested that there could be any choice but either socialism or fascism. He basically assumed authoritarianism as a baseline, and the question was whether it would be left authoritarian or right authoritarian. And so, that was kind of, as I read this book, it was one of those things that really colored his analysis of things. He never analyzed problems from the perspective of, well, hey, what has the government done to cause this problem? It was always, these people have it bad, and the government needs to make it better for them. And it's really too bad that so many socialists here in England are kind of jerks or, tone-deaf people. And so, again, I'm not saying I'm in favor of reading Orwell, obviously, but one needs to be aware. I think it helps to be aware of his biases because they create blind spots in his writing. And those blind spots can lead you to false dilemmas like his, it's either going to be socialism or fascism dilemma, right?
Right.
Another example is H.G. Wells, right? H.G. Wells was promoting what he termed liberal fascism back in the day before fascism got a really dirty name from Hitler. In the space between Mussolini and Hitler, H.G. Wells was promoting a kinder, gentler version of fascism. And, that involves total control of the economy because, well, we got to make those trains run on time. That probably colors his fiction. I haven't read any Wells in a while. I've read a few books from Wells. I've read The War of the Worlds. I've read The Time Machine. I've read one other one, I think. I can't remember which one it was, though. But, if I went back to them today, I'd have to make sure that I was aware of his authoritarian tendencies and make sure that I don't let something like that slide in his fiction and convince me of something that I shouldn't be convinced of. Does that make sense?
It does. It's always a little bit easier to reflect on that if you know that the writing both contains some kind of ideology in that sense, and the writer
Right.
has a certain leaning.
Right.
Because people have written fiction from both sides of, from every side of all sorts of
Every
different
side of
political-
everything, forever.
Yes. Endlessly, to infinity. And then
Right.
beyond. Now, if you want to talk about some fascist
let's
fiction,
not- let's-
Toy Story.
let's not get our channel copyright slammed. No quotations from Disney movies, all right?
No. We're going to steal quotations from Disney while simultaneously putting down Disney, and
Okay,
we know that
you know what? I'm
we
in
both
favor.
know
Let's
that
see how hard the hammer comes down on us.
we both know that Disney is very forgiving
Oh,
when
yeah.
it comes to dampening their image.
Yes, dampening their image and using their intellectual property.
Yeah,
They're very kind and cool and chill about that.
yeah. Even as they destroy their industry all the way to infinity and beyond.
Right.
So it's not a bad idea to necessarily, especially if someone's doing a really hot political work like 1984.
Yeah.
I mean, the premise of the story is that this is political ideology. So knowing the author's viewpoints, I mean, maybe it paints some of it in a bit different light depending on what you know about the author.
Yeah.
I feel like, and actually I can bring up Terry Brooks here because I did read an interview with him. Someone had asked him about a character in his books that was supposed to be based off of Dick Cheney. And,
Okay.
he said some people thought that maybe you were making fun of him, but he's actually pretty heroic. And the interviewer tried to get a bit of an opinion off of him on this political figure, and Terry Brooks has told him, well, I mean, I do have my own views on it, but the writing should speak for itself. If what I put through doesn't, however it comes across to the reader, that's what's important. That's what the book is. If I wrote it in a way that doesn't come across how I wanted it to, that's my fault. It's not the.
Yeah.
He said something along those lines. It's just like,
Well, that's I think a pretty good perspective, right? That he's not. There may be some satire and there may be some poking fun, or maybe it's in the minds of the reader just because the reading of the book coincided with current events or something like that. And I actually kind of admire a little bit the Brooks's ability to not like jump on bandwagons to kind of promote his own stuff kind of thing with a certain segment of the audience and ignore the other. I think that's a skill, a diplomatic skill that a lot of people don't have, and so it's good to see it, I guess.
Yeah, it was interesting to run across that because so one of the first things I found when I was trying to get a fix on his political leanings was there was a Twitter post that linked to I guess it was his thoughts or an interview on certain things that Trump said, but the way it was worded was something abhorrent Trump said, and so a lot of times alarm bells go off in my head when I hear that kind of thing, because 90% of the people that quickly rush to say Trump said something abhorrent,
yes,
they're usually frothing at the mouth and not actually making a clear statement about what he said exactly that was abhorrent and putting it in the proper context. And while
Sure.
I mean, okay, so like, I don't really have a problem with anyone having a problem with Donald Trump. I didn't vote for the guy the last time he ran. Spite might make me vote for him this time. I don't really know. I'm not much of a voter, but it's just, you know how the political winds are right now. There are certain things that would be comedy gold.
Right.
It's just interesting to see that, like, my initial thought seeing that is, oh no, it's going to be like he's this author that makes mad tirades about presidents he doesn't like. But then I go and I couldn't actually find the article. It was like removed from his webpage. It was a 404 error.
Oh.
But it was on terrybrooks.com, so it was actually, his stuff.
Okay.
But I managed to find that interview from there, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's see how he actually behaves in interviews. And he probably would have had something to say in whatever that article was that was vanished from the internet that was coherent and was really putting across what he thought about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I could totally believe it, having read his interviews, and we're talking
it's totally
about
plausible to find something that Trump says abhorrent.
Yeah, I mean it's really not that hard.
Not difficult at all.
And I don't even hate the guy. It's just like I think in the case of Terry Brooks, he wrote The Sword of Shannara. That's the only book he wrote that I actually read. He's written tons of books, but that was his Lord of the Rings clone.
Right.
And since he was writing a book largely to be a clone of Lord of the Rings, it had a mix of his own political ideology as well as Tolkien's.
Uh-huh.
And Tolkien was probably not very aligned with Terry Brooks in the end of it. I mean, a bit here and there. Terry Brooks is a pretty big environmentalist.
Okay.
Which, the irony that I was also looking up Michael Crichton at this time. But
Right.
he does have in his later books where he sort of made Shannara his own thing instead of just a Tolkien knockoff.
Sure.
He makes a lot of environmental messages, and apparently he has characters in it that are supposed to be fictional world versions of real world vice presidents and so forth. So,
okay,
who knows? Like, I don't even know if his books are good after Sword of Shannara. They might be great. I'm not saying that because of his political views they're definitely not going to be good. I mean, I can think of lots of instances of writers that I would disagree with on a lot of things. Hayao Miyazaki, for a start, he's a pretty big environmentalist, but his stories...
Sure. I mean, you can tell from his movies.
Yeah, his movies contain a lot of that, but they're also really good movies.
Yeah.
And I certainly wouldn't tell anyone not to watch Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind just because it has an environmental message that you might not think is really a valid one.
I wouldn't even tell people not to watch Mononoke because of its environmental message, which, in my opinion, Mononoke is the inferior movie to Nausicaa, and the environmental message is a lot stronger in that movie as well.
Yes.
But it's also a great movie. That movie is still an amazing movie.
Yeah, so, these are the things that you have to think about. Like, you can look at a movie that has a different opinion than yourself,
right,
in terms of the writing instead of the ideology. Like, is this a well-written movie? Is it a fun movie? Does it entertain me? Does it give me something to think about? Does it give me characters that I can... Okay, put it like this for younger people. Does it give you characters that you would want to write fan fiction about because they're just so cool?
Right. Well, like, I mean, there seems to be kind of like an overemphasis on allegory among these people who want to make every piece of writing that they have, political about their particular ideas, right? Like J.R.R. Tolkien was an interesting guy. He was kind of I wouldn't even say that he had a lot of like political thought in it per se. He was a deeply Catholic person. He had fought in World War I, and he found that entire situation abhorrent. And he kind of was pro pastoral, if you will. He once remarked he once was talking with someone and heard a motorcycle drive by outside of his house, and he said that is an orc, right? He was very much kind of a shepherds and pastures British Catholic guy. At the same time, he said that he despised heavy allegory, which I thought was an interesting thing. A lot of people have a tendency to try to like pull allegory into the Lord of the Rings series, and he's on the record saying it's not really an allegory for anything. I certainly use some of my experiences to help color some of the events, some of the locations, but at the same time, I'm not a big fan of making these heavy allegorical works, and I kind of really want you to just enjoy the work as a piece of fiction and not worry too much that, like, does Samwise represent Standard Oil kind of nonsense? So yeah, I mean, there are people who would say, oh, well, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but I feel like there are people who are intolerant enough of like, say, organized religion that they would say, oh, well, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, they were so Catholic that I probably don't want to read anything that they wrote. And it's like, you probably should read some of what they wrote, because they were both really good at writing. Even though they have a perspective that you disagree with, you might find something in their perspective on things that at least is thought-provoking, as opposed to simply reading things that you agree with over and over again.
Well, I think that it's just strange that would happen to begin with, because what is the reason not to read something just because of what you think the author believes? Like,
well, I would say that it's a fear of being propagandized, right?
But that's the thing. Like, you're going into it knowing that this person disagrees with you. Is there a fear in people's heads that I might read this and my mind might be changed? Like, wouldn't that be a good reason to read something, though? Like, if you read something,
I can understand not wanting to read something individually challenging at certain times, right? Like, you might want to set aside real time for that, as opposed to, like, casual reading. You don't want to have to be like, wait, is this, is this trying to get me to convince me of something that I'm opposed of, and having to really, like, examine that? You know what I mean?
Kinda. It's always confused me that people would not read something because they think that, like, if your expectation going into something is that it's there to change your mind, you're not obligated to change your mind because you read it.
Sure.
And I get what you're saying about, like, at certain times it's probably better. Like, you might sit down and be like, I kind of want to read this book, but I think it's going to make me angry, but I still want to read it, so I'm not going to read it right now. I'll read it later.
Right.
I mean, that kind of thing can make sense. But on the other hand, if your expectation is that this book could change your mind, that's all the more reason to sit down and read something, because it means that you suspect there's an understanding that you might not be in possession of, and it's sitting right there in front of you. Why wouldn't you look at it?
Well, I mean, there are people who disclaim any sort of platforming of certain perspectives based on the notion that platforming might convince people, right?
Yes, those are fascists.
Yeah, I mean, I realize that, but this is not a small fraction of humanity. This is
also true.
A terrifyingly large fraction of humanity. Still a minority, but they make headway here and there, and it's kind of scary.
Yes, most of them think that they're merely socialists and don't even realize they're actually being fascists.
Yeah, well, most of them don't understand economics from any perspective. They don't understand, it's one of those. There are literally people who will say that left means good and right means bad, which is as strange a perspective as one can have.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the people that kind of do it to themselves, though. Like the people that think that certain things shouldn't even be platformed.
But what can we say, if anything? What can we say to people who think that way? Do we have an argument?
I don't think there's anything you can say to people like that. Once someone has made up their mind that they will not consume something because they believe it is something that shouldn't even be platformed because it might propagandize people, they have already kind of locked themselves into this little, like, cultish religious mindset. The people that think that you shouldn't have religion in anything are a good example, because they don't realize that they're exactly the same as the zealous minister that thinks we should burn certain books that so that they don't end up on school bookshelves and
corrupt the minds of such
corrupt
and
the minds
such.
of youth. Yeah, that's the people that are so anti-religion that they think they shouldn't allow a Bible anywhere are guilty of doing the exact same thing, and they're they have the exact same problem that they claim to be against. So, once someone has completely closed off their ability to look at anything outside of that, their own personal religion, you can't really do anything for them. There's no way to really convince that person, hey, maybe you should look at this, without lying to them at least. I mean, you have to lie to a person like that to get them to look at these things. That's I mean, and people do lie in that sense to try and get people to look at things that is more conforming to their own personal beliefs. Take a lot of the sexualization of children's television shows and movies that are targeted towards kids. They will outright lie and say, what are you talking about? That's not in there. That's a kid's movie. Look, it's labeled kid's movie. But then it's like you watch it and it's like, it's a guy crotch thrusting a kid's face.
Right.
So this video is now removed from YouTube.
Oof, maybe.
No, I don't think that would really matter. There's nothing visual here, and we're just making a point. Yeah, so I don't know if you really can get someone in that mindset to really consume anything that they have already decided is, taboo. They've built their own personal zealous religion. And it's funny because for the most part, most religious people are much more open-minded than that person. There's a lot less, especially these days. There's a lot less.
I would say that there's an extreme on both ends.
Yeah, there's an extreme.
I don't have any data to suggest that one side of one thing is a larger proportional chunk of one than the other side, right? Like I don't know what percentage of religious people are in favor of heavy censorship of this or that. As a percentage of similarly religious people versus how many strong atheists there are who go the other way with censorship of religious works. I mean, I guess the side question to ask, maybe the direction to take this is, as an author, should you try to prevent your personal opinions from becoming public?
I'm not so sure it matters that much. I mean, there's this tendency that a lot of authors want to put themselves out there. Some of them think it helps with advertising. Some of them think that that's just the way it's supposed to be because that's how it's...
Well, certainly there are two, right? There are two schools of thought two fundamentally different schools of thought when it comes to advertising, right? There's the dig into a niche school, right? That says that you find something where there's not a whole lot of competition in that particular niche, but there's still enough people that you can make a living out of it, kind of thing. And then there's the big tent people who say, no, you should make things, understandable and appealing to a large number of people with a large variety of backgrounds. And by making that tent larger, you increase your audience in such a way that you will necessarily do better, right? I would say that, Harry Potter versus Lord of the Rings is kind of an example of this. Harry Potter has wide appeal to a variety of age groups, a variety of backgrounds, a variety of this and that and the other. Whereas Lord of the Rings is a much more difficult, slow, and long work, right? Or I mean, it's not longer because there's actually more Harry Potter books than there are Lord of the Rings books at this point, but it's a more difficult read, and so it not necessarily niches down to the people who are interested in that really lavish fantasy environment with lots of backstory and world building kind of thing, right? Which isn't to say that Harry Potter doesn't have world building, but Tolkien was kind of on another level. He was kind of on the crazy person level of world building.
It was a book written by an adult that wanted to write a book that he, as an adult, would enjoy.
Sure.
Harry Potter is not so much that. Harry Potter is a story that Rowling wanted to write. I'm just going to assume because she had children and she wanted to appeal to children and she knew that the children's market, there was a lot of money and she had a good story idea. Maybe it's the kind of book she likes to read. I don't know, but I'm assuming that any author writes at least a little bit of something in what they do that they themselves would enjoy.
Sure.
I have heard of authors who've complained about writing things that they didn't really want to write.
Uh-huh.
in some cases that happens after they start and they think they're writing something they want to write, but then it becomes popular and they have to keep writing it.
Ah, okay.
Other times there's people that just, they look at the market and they say, this is what the market wants, this is what I'll write, but they don't enjoy that particular type of writing.
Okay, fair enough.
Personally, I think that, you should definitely write something you enjoy, because if you enjoy it, nobody, okay, so like, not that many people are going to come up with an original idea. If you write something and you think it's an original idea, there's probably 1,000 other people that have come up with that same idea and just didn't write it. So the chances that you write something that you like, that 1,000 other people, you can't find 1,000 other people that would like it, those chances are low.
Mm-hmm.
There's an audience for a lot of things. Now, until you get into like really weird fetishy areas. But then, of course, it becomes, well, yeah, you're writing something that actually does have appeal to a lot of other people who are thinking.
Well, that's niching down, right? That's the other side of that.
Yeah, that is. But yeah, as far as having the political opinions, or even just your own personal ideas, like putting them out there as an author. You can't
keep your ideas out of a book, right? Like that
right.
The book is your ideas, so there's no way to keep what you think out of a book. But the question is, like, I guess I'm not exactly sure what the question is, even though I just said the question is and then trailed off. Well, no, the thing is,
I can paint it. I can paint it a bit.
There's not a lot of explicit. Well, I mean, there's zero explicit reference to Catholicism in Lord of the Rings, right? Because it's not in the world. But at the same time, the creation myth and things like that are very inspired by that kind of mythology. So I don't know. It's one of those things where, if there was a guy who said, "Oh, I don't want to read Tolkien. He was too religious." It's like, but his books aren't religious. But then they would come back and say, "Well, I can show you, 10 articles by people who are like, here are, a few places where, Tolkien's religion showed up in Lord of the Rings in a subtle way." And it's like, I mean, I guess, but like, you probably should still read Tolkien, as long as you're not completely opposed to the fantasy genre, I guess, right? Well,
Tolkien's a good case to look at. I mean, it's like you said, he's on record saying that there wasn't supposed to be, this wasn't about allegory.
Right.
Terry Brooks, in his interview, said that he felt some responsibility to put ideas out there in his books, just like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien did.
Yeah.
I don't recall Tolkien really wanting to say much more other than, this appeal to this fantasy world that he had created. And there were lots of things good about it, lots of things bad. There was good versus evil. Just having good versus evil doesn't mean that you are necessarily putting your ideology in something. Good versus evil is just a pretty universal concept. But
true.
For every author that writes something that he thinks he's writing one way, there's 1,000 people who are going to look at it and interpret it exactly the other way. And that's going to paint their view of the author. And, it depends on how much you smack people in the face with it, too. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to look at my book and be like, oh, he was writing this because he wanted to point out how things don't always work out for control freaks.
Yeah.
It's there, but it's not exactly the top tag in the work.
No. I mean, there's a strong, I would say that there's a strong anti-authoritarian message throughout The Good Guy, but like at the same time, it's not written in a way that it feels philosophically heavy, if that makes sense.
Right.
It just feels, light and fun and adventurous.
Yeah, I will always side with the author who is there to entertain over the author who, I guess, except in the case of textbooks. If you're writing a textbook, please teach people things.
Yes, that would help.
It really would, because I remember high school, and a lot of you textbooks writers, shame on you. Use words to mean what you say and put them in order, for God's sake.
That'd be nice.
It would be. I'm not going to go off on too much of a tirade here, but I just want to point out that I have a lot of books from like the 1950s, 60s, and 70s that are textbooks versus the ones I had when I was in high school. And they are much more concise, much more to the point, and clearly cover the things that you want to know. The one
Yeah.
exception I would say is math books from the time that I was in college were not too bad. I'm willing to bet that they're a lot worse now, but that was quite a while ago at this point.
Yeah.
Of course, it was college, so there's no Common Core nonsense, which I know this is a writing podcast. I would like to go on a tirade about Common Core, but we'll skip that too.
Sure.
But yeah, the ideology of a writer can be there, and it can even, shine through at times, and that might work in the author's favor. It might not. There might be people that don't want to read it just because, and that's the thing. The author themselves, if you're looking at the author first and then saying, I won't read that because they believe this, most of what an author writes is probably not, unless they're specifically writing it to be philosophical.
Yeah.
They're probably not going to have a very strong version of their own ideology in anything they write. They might have characters.
The thing is that I wonder whether that's not what people are actually afraid of, right? Pure, straight up popular, not popular, straight up propaganda is easier to dismiss than an idea expressed subtly in a sympathetic framework,
Right. So you think people are maybe more worried that they'll be influenced in some subversive manner as they read. I go back to what I said earlier. If you feel that you are so weak-willed that reading something that you disagree with is going to entirely change your outlook on things, and that's scary to you, I mean, the only thing I can say to you is you need to get out more.
Well, what I would say actually is often that comes from failing to read about the things that you actually believe in, especially when they're like a niche, when it's like and I'm doing this deliberately to not take sides, right? Like there are plenty of people who profess to be, communists who don't read the base documents of Marxism or even Fabian socialism, right? So, like one of the things I've learned is that it helps to read more deeply about the topics that you actually believe in from the side that you believe in as well, because that gives you arguments that you can remember. And, that helps you, if you're worried about being subtly influenced by something, then having a solid grasp of your own ideology as opposed to a kind of like a cloudy idea of I'm for this, but I don't really know why, is actually a good way to inoculate yourself from that kind of subtle influence. At the very least, it makes it easier for you to pick out where those subtle influences are and therefore at least evaluate them according to your own personal ideology.
There's something a bit sinister in all of that when you think about it, because I've seen a lot of people that have been in arguments, and you're watching two people on two different sides argue something, and it becomes clear that one of them doesn't even understand their own side, so they're really losing this argument, but because they haven't heard the other arguments before, they start speaking in platitudes and laughing at the other person to make it seem like they're not losing.
Okay.
But then you also have arguments where it's two people on two different sides where neither of them understands their own side and neither of them understands the other side. And you're just like, neither of these people have read a book.
Right.
And
or even there's group times where two reasonably well-educated people simply talk past each other for an hour and nothing is accomplished.
Well, you and I have done that.
Well, sure.
But you'll have someone who wants to argue for their ideology, and you'll realize they haven't actually read any of their own ideology, and so like what you said kind of makes me wonder if there's the mindset that you shouldn't read the other side because it might influence you. Perhaps these people also don't read their own side because they think that too might influence them to possibly take the other side.
Maybe.
I
think a lot of people. I think if people haven't gone far enough to read any of their own side, they probably haven't thought deeply enough to consider that possibility either. But I guess there could be edge cases.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe not. I mean, there's certainly not any. I don't think there's much of a big push to get people to read Das Kapital these days.
Well, yes, maybe. I don't know. I haven't been in social science courses in university ever, so it might be much more common than you think. I've read short blurbs of people complaining about their the book list for their syllabus for certain classes, where it's like all this communist crap and not any anti-communist stuff. So I don't know, and that probably happens in both directions as well. But
I'm sure it does, yeah.
But like at the same time, I would not put it past America's education system to promote that kind of one-sidedness, and even to promote it in a haphazard way where one group of people gets one side and another group of people gets only the other side, creating what do you call it, creating a conflict that can never be solved because both groups are ignorant of each other's positions.
Yeah, I mean that is kind of what I was thinking, bringing that up. It's like, do you really want, like, you expect that some of these people just got the Cliff Notes?
Yeah, or if that. They skimmed the Cliff Notes.
Yeah, they skimmed them, and then you put someone up against someone who has actually read that stuff but disagrees with it, and 9 times out of 10, that person has no trouble absolutely demolishing people in an argument about the thing that they're passionate about, and it's just like, you should have read the opposing side more. You probably would have been able to make better arguments, but people are too afraid to do that sometimes.
Yeah, there is definitely an element of that, sure.
And you can understand why when like one ideology is like, no, you shouldn't read this, and if we catch you reading it, you're not one of us. So
right.
People should always be wary when they hear that one. It's like, no, that means there's things they don't want you to know. That should be obvious. Like anytime someone says, no, don't read that or you're not one of us, you should be like, okay, I didn't want to be in a cult, so okay, well, I know we're kind of like bringing up the exact things that we're saying now, but like, wouldn't it be funny to see a group of, say, capitalist libertarians telling people not to read Marx? Like, where do you ever see that? You don't see that anywhere. They're all like, no, go ahead, go read Marx. Look at this stupid stuff.
Right. I would temper that a little bit. I would say that there's a pretty significant contingent of people who say, I've read it, and these are the counter arguments, and here are the counter arguments. That's all you really need.
Oh, yeah, and they don't think about it past that. Yeah, that's true.
Well, it's not that they don't think about it. It's like they've thought about it, but they're not encouraging other people to think about it. They're basically feeding an answer list to people,
Yeah.
If Marxist tries argument A, here is response B. If they try argument C, here is response D, which makes debates extremely boring.
Yes, and it's not the best way to debate. I mean,
True. Well, I mean, it makes it boring, which is just one reason why. Which is just one of many reasons why it's not a good way to set up a debate. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't turn people to your side if you just have a standard stock boring argument with terminology. Here's the problem, though. A lot of those people that argue that way, the way they use terminology tends to cater to people who already know the arguments, so they're not convincing anyone.
Yeah, the jargon issue is a significant problem. That's definitely a thing to think about.
Yeah. It's just like you'll hear people think just like blurt out things that they understand fully and just be like, yeah, but say's law, and then it's like, okay, but the people that are listening to you might not even know what you're talking about.
Know what say's law is.
Yeah.
Or who say was. Or what he said. What did say about say?
Say, what you say?
Say, did you hear about that guy Say? He said some things about a law or something.
Yeah, he said, hey, what's going on? So anyway,
Indeed.
Authors putting their ideology out there and, putting their big Twitter bio up and everything. I got to tell you, as someone who is a pretty prolific reader, I don't care. I don't look at your about page. I don't want to know who you are. I want to read your book. Tell me a good story. If it's a biography, then tell me your story. Is your story good? I mean, I don't like biographies, but if you got a good one, I did read Jackie Chan's because I was like, what in the world brought this guy to?
Okay, so just to start, I have not read Jackie Chan's biography. I am not a huge fan of Jackie Chan. I am still going to say that everyone should read Jackie Chan's biography.
I did enjoy reading it.
I bet.
I've read some biographies before where it was like, all right, you're an interesting person, but I really didn't care about any of this, especially when it's people who have media that entertains me in other ways. Like, I mean, if you wrote books and you have a biography, I'm probably reading the books.
Sure.
And I get this feeling that, you and I are both well aware of how things work in publishing circles with famous people and biographies and how they make money off of them, and how a lot of times, especially in politics, it's a friend buy-in, or like maybe a way to launder money to a campaign.
Yeah.
I don't think that, and maybe I'm wrong here. This is a guess. This is entirely a guess on my part. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay. But your Twitter page that talks about you and your dog and your family and all the things you love to do and what kind of person you do, I don't...
What kind of person you do?
What kind of person you are.
Thank you.
Words that mean the things I say. Sometimes I don't get them right.
Look, mean what you say what you mean. One thing leads to another.
Yeah. Wow, we're 2 for 2 on songs here.
Indeed.
They have all this information about themselves, and maybe it's cool that they have... I mean, like, maybe it's a good thing that, you write books, but you also put recipes you like to cook on your website or your Twitter page. Maybe that does get people, and it's like they see the recipe first, and then they're like, oh, this person is also an author. I'll read their books. Books have nothing to do with cooking or anything, but whatever. Maybe that helps to some degree. The thing is, though, I can't recall a time where I ever really read a book and was like, I want to know more about the person who wrote this. It's just never occurred to me. It's just like, what's the next story? That's where I always sat.
Okay, fair enough.
On the occasion where I ran into information about an author, yeah, I would maybe dig in a bit. It's like, ooh, here's something someone posted on Twitter about Terry Pratchett. Oh, that's interesting. And then, you wind up down a rabbit hole or something where now you've got a lot of information about someone that you didn't before. But it always...
Let me ask you a question. Hold on a second. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that Terry Pratchett's... Well, so I think Terry Pratchett described himself as libertarian, so I'll just use that word, right? Like, do you think that Terry Pratchett's libertarianism made it easier for you to enjoy his books?
No, I don't think it did at all. In fact, I wouldn't have even been thinking about that at the time that I started reading. I was probably 14 or 15 when I read my first Terry Pratchett book, and I mean, I care slightly more now, and I'm still not that interested in getting involved in politics. And back then,
that's fair.
It was
that's
like
probably wise, actually.
Yeah, back then it was kind of, hey, there was a PlayStation game that was called Discworld, and apparently someone wrote some books, and the jokes in it were good, and there weren't a lot of authors.
And I'm going to consume all of this.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are not a lot of authors that do fantasy comedy or even science fiction comedy like Douglas Adams did, and. Terry Pratchett was like finding a gold mine when I came across those books, because I mean, really, who does write humor and do it well? Very few people. And
I guess my question, I got to go back to my question, because like if all of Terry Pratchett's books had been about how awesome and infallible the ruler of Ankh-Morpork was, that probably would have made you enjoy his stuff less, no?
But the ruler of Ankh-Morpork was pretty infallible. That was the thing.
Fair point.
Terry Pratchett would parody a lot of things that happen in the real world. I can give you some examples there.
Okay, throw them out here.
So Lord Vetinari, in one of the books, there's, they had mentioned how he had become the patrician of Ankh-Morpork, but they'd never really said exactly what happened. And in one of the books, they do tell you, Terry Pratchett does tell you exactly how it came about. The the person that was on the throne before the patrician was in a
Yeah.
room at a party, and the patrician had been making all of these, call them friends or acquaintances, in high places, and trained as an assassin, working at the Assassin's Guild, and making it to the top of his game as a lethal assassin. Lord
Yeah.
Vetinari walks into this party, and conveniently, as soon as he walks in, right through the front door, everyone turns around and just starts talking to each other. And he just walks right up to the current patrician, murders him, and walks away. And then everyone turns around again.
Uh-huh.
This is the kind of patrician that Lord Vetinari is. He's just like, well, I'm just going to do what I need to do to get the job done and make things run efficiently. And so he befriended all these people and said, hey, basically, he put everyone in a situation where it's like, look, you hate this guy. I can run things better. Just turn your backs when I enter the room and I'll kill him. And it was, it's like the greatest assassination in all of Discworld history. And there were simultaneously hundreds of witnesses and 0 witnesses.
Right.
Everyone knew what happened, but the history books say that nobody knows how the patrician died.
Right, right.
So he takes over.
It almost sounds like something out of like Dwarf Fortress.
Yes, actually, it is pretty funny that way. So yeah, there's definitely this kind of like parody of how things happen in the real world, where you have the assassination of someone and then the person responsible takes over. But it was just done in this extreme and pretty hilarious way when you sit back and think about it.
Sure.
This is in the later books too. You get to see everything he's done since then in the earlier books first. So you see how he develops Ankh-Morpork into a well-oiled machine where instead of people breaking into houses and mugging people and stealing things, he puts the Thieves Guild to work, makes them an official body, and then has them policing themselves to make sure people aren't stealing too much. Thieves aren't supposed to kill people now, so that's like the Assassin's Guild will come after you if you encroach on their territory. That's up to them. Assassins have to have certain set prices for certain things, and they have to do things in certain they have to follow certain rules. Everyone's got to follow certain rules. He unionized thieving and assassination.
Yes.
And he just so I mean, and obviously like unions aren't exactly the biggest libertarian thing. So like you don't really see the libertarian side creeping into Discworld from that angle so much. Like everything kind of runs like the real world, just in like a slightly off way.
Yeah, yeah.
But then the underpinnings of the story are largely to do with individual characters who just want to do things the way they want to do them, with, I think, the culmination of that probably being Granny Weatherwax.
Yeah.
Granny Weatherwax in the book Weird Sisters, she makes the point that she doesn't like the new king and he's doing things that she disagrees with, but she can't interfere because, as she puts it, magic is not supposed to rule a kingdom. And if it does, it's always going to have to. And there'll never be a king on the throne that'll be able to do anything without first looking at the witches and being like, hey, is this okay? And so she doesn't want to interfere. And of course, later in the book, when things go a bit too far and Granny's too angry not to interfere, one of the other witches says, well, that's the thing you have to understand about her. When she says something is a rule, she usually means a rule for everyone else. And if there's one rule that she does follow, it's that when you break rules, break them good and hard.
Right.
Which, by the way, Terry Pratchett is numero uno, the master of cool dialogue. When a character says something cool, it's cool.
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of libertarian underpinnings in his stories if I go back and look at them.
Sure.
But there's a lot of things that would make you think otherwise. Like a lot of people might think that he's perhaps very left-leaning, and I don't know what his stance is on feminism. I don't think that Terry Pratchett would approve of modern-day feminism, but he wrote a book called Equal Rights that was all about how the eighth son of an eighth son is supposed to be a sorcerer or a wizard. But
Okay.
it so happened that there was an eighth daughter of an eighth son. And so the question was, okay, well, technically she's a wizard, but they don't let women in at the at Unseen University.
Right.
So Granny Weatherwax travels with this girl, I can't remember her name, begin with an E, I think, or something.
Okay.
He travels with her to Unseen University to talk them into taking her as a wizard. And, you know, they make it this whole thing where it's like it breaks open this barrier from at the end of the book where it's like, okay, we'll accept her as one of the wizards. But it's not sitting there pounding you in the head with like, oh, women can do this and women can do that. It has a lot of that in the story where there will be moments where like a man tries to tell Granny Weatherwax how something is going to be, and it's like, no, she's Granny Weatherwax. She's the most powerful witch in the world. You are not going to tell her how to do anything she doesn't want to do.
Right.
It's a really good book, and it doesn't read to me as preachy feminism at all. It just reads to me as like, hey, here's a girl who could be a wizard. Let her be a wizard.
I mean, is preachiness the it factor here? Is that what we need to try to avoid?
I don't really know, because there's times where it's appropriate. There's times where you have a character who truly believes something and might want to give a speech about something. But okay, I can think of a good example.
Okay.
I think I was a little bit ahead of the curve on most of the people I knew when I saw what Star Wars was going to turn into.
Mm-hmm.
I remember coming back from the theater after, what was it, The Force Awakens was the first of the newer Disney Star Wars movies?
I mean, well, technically, I think... Did Force Awakens come out before Rogue One?
I believe so, yeah. Quite a bit before, I think. I remember going to the theater, and I was pumped. I was excited. I was like, ooh, new Star Wars. Haven't seen this in a while. I didn't care too much for... And this, of course, is going to make people want to completely never consume anything I do again, because it's an altering opinion. I really liked The Phantom Menace. I did not like the other two later Lucas movies.
You monster.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think too many people will argue with me that The Phantom Menace was probably better than the other two. Maybe they will.
I think a lot of people say that the third one of the prequel series is the best one, but I
thought it was horrible.
I'm also not a Star Wars fan, so
like by the third one, I kind of felt like things had gotten disjointed, and a lot of what was going on didn't seem to stem from rational character actions.
I mean, I saw each of the prequels exactly once in the theater because my family went to the theater to see the prequels.
Yeah, the thing that I enjoyed about The Phantom Menace was, it had its goofiness in it, and it had a lot of things that people didn't like, and it
had pod racing and the line, I'll try spinning, that's a good trick.
I will definitely say that Anakin was my least favorite part of that movie, and here's where people are really going to hate me. I liked Jar Jar. I did not think... I mean, he was definitely...
Okay, now you're really a monster. We just got canceled by the entire...
Oh, we're going hard today. We are...
Everyone.
That's half the globe at least. Like, anyone we didn't cover from now up until this time, and all of our other...
You're not going to find a single person who's like, oh, I love Jar Jar. Even me, I don't love Jar Jar. Good God.
I don't love Jar Jar. I just thought there wasn't... You just thought it
was the best part of this movie that you thought was the best movie of the prequels.
No, he was not the best part. I just didn't think he was all that bad as a character in the movie. He might not have done much. He might have just been there for comic effect.
Sure.
But it wasn't... Like, I've seen way worse characters that were put in for just comic effect. Like, go back and watch the old Dungeons and Dragons movie, where they had Keenan Ivory Waynes as an elf, and he was only there in a movie that should have been completely serious, because it's Dungeons and Dragons. It's supposed to be like this high fantasy epic movie.
Yeah.
And you've got a Wayne's brother in there who's just there to act like a Wayne's brother from In Living Color or something.
With extended ears.
Yeah, with extended ears.
A Wayne's brother with extended ears.
Yeah, that is bad comedy. That is a bad comedy gravedigger. Jar Jar Binks, not so much.
I mean, you know, the funny thing about Dungeons & Dragons, the movie, was that it came out in 2000 from New Line Cinema. And 1 year later, New Line Cinema released The Fellowship of the Ring.
Yes, that is actually really weird. Maybe they should have gotten Peter Jackson.
Talk about whiplash, jeez.
Yeah. It's like, ooh, fantasy movie. Ooh, Wayne's brother fan. What?
Yeah.
it's not even that they're necessarily bad actors. I don't think I'm the biggest fan of Keenan. What is it? Keenan Ivory Wayans is his full name.
I
But
think
like
so.
Damon Wayans, I thought was pretty good in the movie Major Payne,
Okay.
and I think that they can all act. I just think that their particular comedy has never been my cup of tea.
Sure.
But talking about the Force Awakens movies, here's the real issue I had with it. Everyone else, I went into the theater and like I said, I was pumped for it, and I was like, ooh, new Star Wars. And the first couple minutes, they had me feeling like, hey, this is actually kind of Star Warsy. And then it's like slowly started to like drift off a bit, and I was a little skeptical for a minute at the beginning. Then I was like, nah, I mean, it's just, it's the beginning. I'm sure this is going places. And then I started to get a little bit more skeptical, and then I was like, what is this character even doing? What's the motivation for where they are now? Why is this here? Why? Oh, she can just use the Force now. Wait, what just happened? And I'm watching this movie, and it occurred to me after the movie, not while I was watching it. Like I couldn't quite get a grasp on the problem I was having with the movie, because I came out of it and everyone else thought it was a great movie that I had gone with. And I was just like, I didn't like it. I didn't like the characters. I don't really see where the sequel's going to go from here. Like, I wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt, because in my head they were going to make Finn the Jedi in this movie, and that's not where they went. And I was like, okay, maybe they just wanted to throw me a curveball, and where the story picks up in the second movie, it's going to be, they're going to flesh out why each character went their own way, which they did not.
Right. Well, I mean, we know that Rian Johnson threw away the notes that J.J. Abrams left to him, so...
Yeah, so, spot on.
Way to go, dude.
Yeah, good one. So the problem that I saw after I thought about it for a while, and I think this is the real problem that those movies had, putting aside the fact that the writers for that movie were not real writers.
Right.
All of the characters, you brought this up close to the beginning when we started talking here. You have characters who are developed as characters with their own ideologies that may or may not reflect the ideology of the author, and that's one thing. You can talk about a character that beats you over the head with philosophy from the author's perspective, but it can still be that character's character. These characters in these movies, I watched, I'm convinced that this was the case, but this is what I thought after I came out of that theater, after the first movie. They were not characters that were meant to be developed, and this is the problem with a lot of writing in television and movies today. They were there to be vessels, and as vessels, they were meant to take whatever they wanted to beat you over the head with philosophically at any given moment. They just put into that character, and they didn't let the characters be anything organic themselves. They didn't really have any storylines that completed in any sense of the word. Nothing that happened to a lot of the characters made sense. Sometimes the things that happened were contradictory to what you were told was the actual case for the character. Such as, okay, so you've got one character that tells the character Rey, hey, I know your parents, and they were nobody. They weren't special. They weren't anything that really mattered. And apparently that was some of the notes that got thrown away. Rey was not supposed to be Rey Palpatine. She was just supposed to be Rey, and she was just supposed to, move through the story as someone who became something great, even though she didn't come from anything great.
Right.
But then by the last movie, you find out, oh, she's the granddaughter of whatever his name Palpatine was, Senator Palpatine or whatever.
Yeah.
And then she claims the name Skywalker for herself, which
right.
It could have been an interesting story arc if she had met with Luke, trained with him, had a connection with him, and then adopted the name Skywalker, and they had made it clear that, Luke Skywalker, who didn't really have anyone to pass the name onto, now had this protege, and basically adopts her into his family, giving her the name Skywalker.
Well, I don't think Luke ever actually did that, but
no,
okay.
No, that didn't happen. There was no real connection between them by the end of the movie, other than like some fake thing where it's like, God, I don't even know if they did that now that I think about it. It's hard to think of those movies without wanting to choke myself. And you had another character that, she's in possession of Luke Skywalker's lightsaber at one point, hands it to the characters and says, the story of how I got this is for another time. And we never get that story. So it's just like, no, they aren't finishing anything. They aren't telling you anything about this world, about these characters. They're just vessels so that when they get to a point where someone is about to save everyone that he cares about, someone else interrupts him because she doesn't want him to die. And she's like, no, screw all those people. I know we're here to save them, but you're valuable too. And then it's like, no, you just murdered all those people. That's what you just did.
Yeah.
But also we're going to paint you, this is a good moment in the movie. And it's just like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
Like I could have totally understood if that had happened in the movie and the reaction of the characters, like, what are you doing? We're screwed now. And it's like, this character has to realize that they made a mistake, even though they saved someone they loved. This person was sacrificing themselves for everybody else to live, and now those people are doomed, and something else has to save them. And like, this could have been a character development moment where it's like, you should not have done that, and this character should have had to reflect on that. But no, it's just like, nope, this is a lovey-dovey moment. Have them kiss and have them be like, hey, yeah, let's just make this a, I saved you, I'm a hero moment. No, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
It was just, this character was just another vessel for in that moment to point out that everyone's life is valuable, which we already knew, which is the connection that we had with the character that was going to kill himself. And that was the point. It was like, he's valuable and he sacrificed himself. You as the, well, I was going to say reader, but the watcher.
Yeah, the viewer.
You now have a connection with this character, and you feel bad that happened to him, and that would have been.
But at the same time, you understand why he did what he did.
Yes, you fully understand it. And they took all of that development of that character out of the movie. I mean, they could have had him saved in the same way, but with different results. Other than there was no consequences for that act. Nothing bad happened because of that, except for the extra people that had to die.
Yeah.
And the character that caused that.
Didn't they like solve that problem at the last moment by having them like find a hidden way out of the out through the back of the base?
Yeah, which
and so like
nobody was looking for apparently. Like these magic creatures showed up,
and then lowered the stakes, and then raise the stakes, and then lower the stakes, and then raise the stakes, and then lower the stakes, and you're just left with a broken neck.
Yes, even the scenes were vessels for them to just put in whatever they felt like at any given moment. Like if the people that were in this world were the scientists from the 3-body problem, they would be killing themselves over how things aren't operating in any way that is consistent with their scientific knowledge.
Right.
Which is a whole other can of worms I won't even know. But yeah, I think that the problem with modern writing is that they've turned every character in every book, every television show, every movie into a vessel that can change on a dime and doesn't...
Yeah.
There's nothing you can actually know or feel about these characters because...
Well, so the interesting thing here is that if everything is just an empty vessel for an ideological point, then you really can't help but make something that is, propaganda banging against your head.
Yeah, that's all there is. Right? That's all that's left.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So I don't know how much that relates to the ideology of writers or anything, but I feel like that has...
I brought it back at the end. That was the whole point.
Yeah, I feel like that has a significant amount to do with it. It's like the writer is an ideologue who just wants to...
Well, not every writer is an ideologue, right? Like some people are managed to be moderately non-ideological, right? They just don't care about any of that stuff and they just want to write. But for writers who do have any ideological position... Go ahead.
Well, the character development here doesn't matter to them. They aren't there to create a character and to create an experience for anyone that's being entertained this way. Anyone that's there to be entertained or there to make some kind of connection with a story or a character. That's not what the people who are writing these things are there for. They have a vessel, they put whatever they want into the vessel, up to and including taking IP that they did not create and taking the characters from those properties and changing them too into vessels and removing anything of what they once were and turning everyone into a husk and just saying, this is what this character believes now. And even that is only for the moment, because they might decide something else later, because it might reflect something I saw in the news today that I want to talk about.
Right, right.
So yeah, ultimately, there's a lot of problems with movies and television shows and books like that these days, and I think that is the biggest problem. That is the biggest reason why most of it is garbage, honestly. So like I said, I don't think it matters too much if you put yourself out there as an author. You can if you want to. I don't think you have to. I think that whether or not you can write the material is going to be reflected in, whether or not people are entertained by it.
Yeah.
And whether or not they want to come back for more because you've created something interesting that appeals to people and appeals to their sense of enjoyment.
Yeah.
I'm being needlessly needlessly worded, trying to clear my throat out.
You're being a wordy? The wordy pair?
I'm being half of a wordy pair. But I
Maybe
don't know,
even 2/3.
Like, what do you think about the idea that an author has a ton of information about themselves out there, and how much it might reflect on what they write? Like,
well, like I would say that back in the day, it was possible to have an identity separate from your identity as a writer, but these days it's a lot harder to do so. Unless you have made a concerted effort to maintain your anonymity in a variety of places, or unless you religiously use a pseudonym that has never been connected to your actual name, you're going to have trouble with people who have that position that you shouldn't read things by people who have an opposing ideology to yours. You're going to have trouble with those people, but I think that probably the best solution is to mostly ignore those people, if not mock them.
I'm in agreement with that.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way. There's a saying floating around of monetize your haters, and that seems like a fairly good advice in general.
Yeah, I'm more of the ignore type, but monetizing them is also valid in my book.
Yes.
I would also say
because realistically, like, you shouldn't. Let me just kind of bring this full circle a little bit. You shouldn't worry about the opinions of someone who is themselves worried about, subtle ideological points being made in a book that they're reading, completely flip-flopping their opinions. This is already a weak-minded person. Therefore, what they say has very little value.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things to think about there too. So like I'm not a big fan of Twitter. I dabble in Twitter, but it's not important to me. And
right.
I could just as equally do all of my writing away from that and away from, even bothering to update anything on a Twitter account. Like, I don't really go on there and be like, ooh, check out this new stuff I'm doing. I occasionally put up a link to my books. And I'm under a pseudonym, but I also put my books up with my real name on them. So I'm not trying to hide anything when I'm on Twitter. I really just don't care.
You're in a very like unique position in that you're not actually. I wouldn't say not trying, but I'm saying that you don't put a lot of focus on trying to make money as a writer. You just want to put your stuff out there. You're the what Mises referred to as the hopeless genius type that just has to get that stuff out. Right?
Yeah, that's probably accurate.
And so, like, for the purposes of people who actually might want to market their writing to a large variety of people, or to a niche variety of people, right? That there might be actually more important to think about these things before you jump into them.
Yeah, if you want to have a Twitter presence, then you just want to make sure to know how to curate your Twitter. And if you don't care about it, like I could easily sit back and just do my thing without being on the internet in any real presence of my personal life in any way whatsoever. I could just write the books and put them out there. Equally, I could, goof off on Twitter, which is pretty much all I do.
Yeah.
On there, and continue writing the way I write and just putting my stuff out there. You're always, no matter, even if you're a nobody author, At some point, you'll get ragged on by someone on Twitter, and you can either have a bit of fun with them or ignore them, or, like you said, monetize your haters.
Yeah.
But if you're really intent on like making Twitter an integral part of your writing, then you need to understand that, first off, you have to not be afraid of bad reviews, because there are people who will give you bad reviews just because they disagree with you ideologically, and you need to have the self-control to not attack people who review your books. If you see a bad review on Amazon, you are not obligated to defend yourself as a writer. Everyone knows that everyone knows that sometimes there's bad reviews on things that are good products. Nobody looks at 5 good reviews and then 1 bad review and says, "Oh, well, this 1 bad review is the right one." you know, so there's people that put way too much stock in that. I have never really selected a book based on the number of star rating it has on Amazon. I've looked at them to try and get an idea of whether or not I want to read, but for the most part, I look at the cover, ironic in my case. I look at the title, semi-ironic in my case, and then I read the blurb, and it's usually in that order. Like I usually get the title second and the picture first.
Yeah.
The irony,
just because usually the title is part of the picture, and the picture shows up first.
Yeah.
And then the blurb is only available once you've clicked on the picture, which
is insane to me, because there should be a little blurb with the books. That everything is so picture based these days. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes it gets out of control.
There's nothing wrong with that, but there's something wrong with that.
The thing that's wrong with it is, I remember, like, think of video games. Think of, say, the online PlayStation Store, where you would first log into it and you would be able to shop around and look for digital stuff to download. And, you're using the same hardware as when you originally bought it, but they've updated it and made every picture 4K and made videos auto load on the store now. And so now you try to look at things and it takes forever for the store to load. You can't get to the text that tells you what the game is until you've sat through a couple seconds of a movie loading. The movie never shows you gameplay. It always shows you some CG footage from in the game.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. And this doesn't help the shopping experience in any way. It's kind of the same.
It just sounds like you need to get a better TV.
No, when you...
I'm kidding.
The extra size of the image is really what slows it down a lot of times. You've got a PlayStation 4 is built with specific hardware. So when it got to the point, 5 years later, they've upgraded the store so many times with so much bigger images, the original hardware isn't good enough to run the store that is meant for that hardware now. And that's stupid.
Right.
And I don't know if that's just their way of trying to nudge people into getting the next system or what, but usually I would think that most people are just going to download less because they don't want to deal with it. And especially in that case, because not a lot of people switched from the PS4 to the PS5 from what I'm seeing.
Right.
But, that's getting sidetracked again. We're getting back to, you've got your books on Amazon or some digital download place. People are going to see a few certain things first. So, maybe you want your Twitter presence to show off a bit more of what your book has to offer. Maybe you want to have a little bit of a picture, but then have a big old blurb that people can look at and post that once in a while, or advertise. You can advertise on Twitter. You can have your post pop up on people's feeds. I know that in some ways that works. I'm not a big fan of advertisements on my feed, so I know that there's a lot of people out there that are starting to kind of feel the way I do, where it's like, ooh, an advertisement, block. I try to give a bit of leniency for things I actually like. Like if I see a book pop up, even if it's a book I don't think I'll buy, I don't just block it right away. It's like, oh, it's an author trying to peddle their wares, and I can understand that. But when I see an advertisement for like the new Apple phone, it's like, no, I'm just going to block Apple. I don't care.
Yeah.
I think that there's a tendency of authors to overthink this stuff. And this is coming from someone who likes to think about these things as deeply as possible. I don't actually let it...
And yet at the same time also doesn't sell any books.
Yeah, well, I don't actually do much more beyond thinking about it. Like I want to kind of understand the ins and outs, but I don't employ much of it. And it's like you said, I will never be some great marketer. I would just rather put the stuff out there and see what happens. I love the idea of organic growth of everything that, you try to do.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing to do. I mean, I tried running my own business once, and it wasn't particularly hard to do the type of stuff I wanted to do. But every time I thought about how I would be able to expand things, it turned into something where I realized this isn't what I want to actually do. Like I really didn't want to run a business that I couldn't run entirely by myself, and that's very difficult.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to, if you want to expand in any way that would include having warehouse space, for instance, you kind of need to start hiring people. And I thought maybe I could handle doing that with like 3 or 4 people, and I read some of the stuff that you have to do, taxes and everything. It's not too hard. You can do it. Lots of people do. It just wasn't for me. I just didn't want to deal with it. So, it's like, I'm just going to be a failed businessman and close this down.
Yeah, fair enough.
So there's not going to be one definite way for everything to work. And depending on what you write, that's going to completely change the audience you're after anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, it does warrant some thinking about it. Overthinking it might lead you down the pathway of not getting anything done because you've become paranoid about what you have to do. In reality, you just have to do something. Keep studying what you're studying to learn how to be better at what you're doing, but do something always. Don't just like get frozen up because you've got too much information coming in and you think you need all of it.
Yeah.
So I guess my point there was don't overthink how much of your personal information and how much of your personal life you need to share on Twitter to be the personable author that is approachable, that people will look at your books because of how friendly you are online or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean that makes sense, right, to you?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So that's what I have to offer there, and I know it took me over an hour to answer that question.
Something like that.
But it was a pretty important question, and it meant I didn't have to get too into how little I read about Michael Crichton and Terry Brooks.
Fair enough.
Saved by the bell.
Yeah, indeed. And with that, I think we'll call this an episode. Kind of meandered a little bit, but some stuff there that I hope is useful to anyone listening who is themselves, writing or considering writing, and good stuff.
I just want to know how many more years it's going to be before we can sit down and do these kind of things and not be sidetracked by how bad Disney movies are. Like, can they just go away as a company so I don't have to do this anymore?
Yeah, it'd be great, wouldn't it? But I think, unfortunately, they have enough money that they can keep making crappy movies for quite a few decades before they run out.
I hope that's not the case. My biggest hope is that they turn everything around and just make good movies again. Because I like movies. I would like to be able to go to the theater and enjoy myself again.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the Wordy Pair, being wordy about things that...
That's us being wordy about random stuff.
Yep.
Anyway, everyone, thanks for watching, or if you're on YouTube, or thanks for listening. As always, I'm Rudy.
And I'm Justin, and we are both canceled, all because of Jar Jar Binks.
All Jar Jar Binks' fault.
It's all him.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's @Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, @Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.